The man in the flannel shirt small gun store on the edge of town had been quiet all morning. 3 regulars sat on bar stools near the back, sipping from dented coffee mugs, talking about ammo prices and old war stories. Behind the counter, a tall man with a buzz cut and a voice like gravel polished a rifle without really looking at it. The air smelled like gun oil and dusty wood. The place wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. At 10:07 a.m., the bell above the door rang. They all turned to look. A man stepped in, thin, quiet, wearing a worn flannel shirt, jeans, and scuffed boots. His hair was messy, like he had just rolled out of bed, and a brown leather bag hung from his shoulder. He looked around slowly, as if he didn't quite belong. "Can I help you, sir?" the man behind the counter asked, trying not to sound too skeptical. "Just browsing," the man said softly. His voice was calm, steady, polite. But one of the regulars couldn't help himself. He nudged the man next to him and smirked. "Hey, isn't that the movie guy, John Wick or something?" "You're kidding," the second man laughed. "That guy, he looks like he's lost." "Nah," the first one said louder now, clearly, trying to provoke something. "He looks like he came in here to ask for directions to a yoga class." They chuckled. The man in the flannel shirt didn't respond. He just walked slowly down the aisle, stopping at a display of handguns. He didn't pick anything up, didn't ask questions, just looked carefully. The man behind the counter raised an eyebrow. "You interested in something specific? Something reliable?" the man said. "For training." The laughter behind him got a little louder. "You sure you're in the right place, buddy?" One of the men said. "This isn't a Hollywood prop shop." Keanu turned around. His eyes were calm, but something in them made the room feel smaller, like he could see straight through every layer of noise in the room. "I've done some training before," he said softly. "Yeah," the third man finally spoke, standing up now. He was younger than the others, broad-shouldered, with a tattoo of a skull on his forearm. "What kind of training?" "Camera angles." Keanu didn't rise to it. He never raised his voice, never showed his teeth. "Military-style weapons handling," he said. "Live drills, combat tactics, close quarters, movement." The room got a little quieter. "You ex-military?" the guy behind the counter asked, suddenly more serious. Keanu shook his head. "No, just trained with some." His fingers brushed across the grip of a simple 9mm pistol. He didn't pick it up, just felt it, like a pianist feeling the keys before. "The music, you want a rental lane?" the owner asked. "We've got the range in the back. $50 an hour." Keanu nodded. "That'd be perfect." As he walked toward the back room, one of the regulars muttered, "This is gonna be good. Hope he brought extra magazines for all the missing shots." Keanu heard it, but didn't respond. Inside the range, the sound changed. The door sealed shut behind him, blocking the world out. Keanu stood still for a moment, letting the silence wrap around him. The owner handed him ear protection, safety glasses, and a few loaded magazines. "Targets are already set. Let me know if you need help." Keanu gave a small nod. "Thanks." A moment later, the first shot rang out. Then the second, third, fourth. The rhythm was clean, sharp, controlled, like a heartbeat. In the store up front, the laughter had stopped. The owner looked at the back door, then at the other men. "You hear that grouping?" The younger man frowned. "No way he's that precise." But then came the controlled burst pattern. 3 rounds, half-second pause. 3 more center mass, perfectly spaced. The store grew quiet. Even the coffee mugs were still. "I'm going back there," the owner said. When he opened the viewing window into the range, he froze. Keanu was moving like a soldier. No wasted motion. His reload was smooth, fast. He transitioned from the pistol to a rifle like it was muscle memory. The target downrange, now fully lit, was shredded only in the center, never the edges. "What the hell?" one of the men whispered, now standing beside the window. Keanu moved in silence, switching positions, adjusting his stance. Even his breathing was controlled. He wasn't just firing, he was dancing, a silent choreography of efficiency, respect, and discipline. Then he did something none of them expected. He holstered the weapon, walked to the back corner of the range, and began setting up a new drill. Not with arrogance, not to show off, but like a student who never stopped learning. One of the men said under his breath, "This guy isn't playing." The owner stepped back into the room, still in disbelief. When Keanu finally emerged from the range, sweat on his brow and his hands calmly folded, the entire store had changed. No more jokes, no more smirks. Just silence and eyes wide open. The younger man, now leaning against the counter, spoke first. "Where'd you learn to move like that?" Keanu wiped his forehead with a towel. "Spent a few years training with guys who'd seen real combat. They were kind enough to share what they knew." "You a competitive shooter?" the tattooed man asked. Keanu shook his head. "No, I just wanted to be ready for whatever life throws." One of the older men finally chuckled, but not in mockery this time. It was quiet, respectful. "We laughed when you walked in," he said. "Thought you were just another actor playing tough." Keanu smiled, but it was humble, gentle. Most people who are really tough don't need to say it out loud. The owner stepped forward and extended his hand. "You're welcome here anytime." Keanu shook it, firm, calm. As he stepped out of the store, the bell above the door rang again. The wind outside had picked up, but Keanu didn't rush. He walked down the street as the men inside the store stood frozen, watching him go. They didn't see a celebrity anymore. They saw a man who had earned something they didn't give lightly. Respect. And deep inside, each one of them wondered, who else had they misjudged without ever looking closer? Because that day, it wasn't just about Keanu's aim. It was about presence. Discipline. And the quiet strength of humility. A challenge no one expected. Next morning, the sun peeked over the hills like it had forgotten how to shine. A gentle fog still hugged the ground as the small gun store opened its door to another regular day. Or so they thought. The men inside the store, Dan, Mick, and Tommy, were still talking about what they had seen the day before. It had become something of a myth overnight. They'd even replayed the surveillance footage when the store closed. "I mean, did you see how smooth his mag change was?" Mick said, half laughing in disbelief. "That wasn't training, that was art." "I've never seen a civilian move like that," Dan added. "Not even close." Tommy, the younger one with the tattoo, leaned back in his chair. "It's like he was made of water. No wasted movement. Every step had purpose." They weren't mocking anymore. They were learning. And for men like them who had spent years thinking they knew everything about firearms and tactical shooting, this shook something deep. Then the bell above the door rang again. They turned. Keanu walked in, dressed almost the same flannel shirt, jeans, boots. This time, he carried no bag, just a calm presence and a polite nod. "Morning," he said. Dan nodded back. "Wasn't expecting you. I left my towel here yesterday," Keanu said with a small grin. The joke landed. They all smiled. But what came next none of them expected. "Hey," Tommy called out, standing up. "You up for a little challenge?" Keanu turned. "What kind of challenge?" Tommy pointed to the far wall, where a dusty chalkboard stood. At the top were names and numbers. "Speed and accuracy shoot. Our little tradition. You get one pistol, one target, and 30 seconds. We record your group and your time. Best score stays up there. We've been doing it for years." Keanu walked over, studied the board. Tommy's name was at the top. "You in?" Tommy asked, raising an eyebrow. "No pressure, just for fun." Keanu didn't hesitate. "I'm in." They all perked up. "All right," Tommy said, rubbing his hands together. "Ranges open." They all filed into the back. Dan grabbed the stop timer. Mick set up the camera just in case they wanted to analyze later. The air was suddenly different, heavier. It wasn't just a casual morning anymore. Keanu stepped into the booth. He adjusted the ear protection, tested the pistol's weight in his hand, then stared down the range. "Ready when you are," Dan said, holding the timer. "On your mark, beep." Keanu moved like water again. Draw, fire, fire, adjust, fire, reload, move, reposition, fire. 30 seconds, 20 rounds. The timer beeped again. Dan stepped forward slowly, mouth slightly open. He walked down to the target, pulled it in. The entire center was gone. One ragged hole the size of a fist, all within the inner ring. "This is insane," Mick said. Tommy stared. "I've never seen grouping like that." Keanu took off the ear protection and stepped back. How'd I do? Dan walked back, holding the target like it was sacred. This is a perfect score. I didn't think it was even possible. Your time's faster than any of ours, and your accuracy. I mean, this isn't even about speed anymore. Keanu didn't gloat, didn't brag. He just gave a small, quiet nod. Thank you, he said. But it didn't end there. Who trained you? Mick finally asked. Keanu paused, thoughtful. I've trained with Navy SEALs, SWAT instructors, and private tactical teams, he said. But the truth is, most of what I've learned came from failure, hours of mistakes, days of doing it wrong, until it felt right, and respect for the tool, for the skill, for the responsibility. The room was silent. He added, guns aren't power. They're precision. They're respect. Those words landed harder than any round fired that day. After Keanu left, the three men stood together quietly. You know, Tommy said, I used to think all actors were soft. Dan nodded. Me too. Mick chuckled. And now we're rethinking our whole training setup. They looked at the board again. Keanu's name now sat at the top. Written not in chalk, but in something deeper. Earned respect. The rest of the week, things changed in the store. More people came in, asking questions. Is it true Keanu trained here? Did he really shoot a perfect group? Can you teach like he does? The owner smiled. We're not him, but we're learning from him. And learn they did. By the next week, they had scheduled their first ever free training session for veterans and beginners. Tommy offered to teach drills. Dan volunteered to help with safety protocols. Mick brought in his own gear for others to use. But none of it would have happened if a quiet man in a flannel shirt hadn't walked in one morning and let his skills speak louder than words. Because sometimes it only takes one moment, 1 hour to shift the way people think. And sometimes the loudest message is delivered in silence, through calm hands and practiced grace. The veteran in the Kernerth following Saturday. The sun rose slow and golden over the town. A gentle breeze passed through the open fields behind the small gun store, carrying with it the scent of dust and sage. Inside the shop, something unusual was happening. It was still early, but the store was full. People of all ages had shown up, men, women, even teenagers with their parents, not to buy, but to learn. The sign on the window read, Free Basics and Safety Course, all welcoming. Right beneath it, written in smaller letters, inspired by someone who reminded us what quiet strength looks like. Inside, Tommy was showing a group how to safely clear a weapon. Dan was drawing a diagram on the whiteboard about sight alignment and trigger control. Mick was adjusting gear for a woman who had never held a pistol before. The atmosphere wasn't loud or tough. It was calm, respectful, different. And then, in the far corner, sat a man who hadn't said a word since he arrived. He was older, maybe in his late 60s, thick gray beard, long coat, and a walking cane leaning against his knee. His eyes were sharp, but tired. He didn't ask questions, didn't move much, just sat there, watching. Keanu arrived through the back door quietly, wearing the same flannel and jeans. He didn't want a crowd, didn't want attention. He had only come to observe, maybe offer some tips if needed. But when he saw the older man in the corner, he paused. You see him? Keanu whispered to Dan. Dan nodded. Yeah, came in before we opened. Hasn't said much. Keanu walked over, not fast, not dramatic, just slow and steady. May I sit? He asked the older man. The man nodded. Sure. Keanu sat beside him. For a moment, neither said anything. They just watched Tommy demonstrate a reload drill with a teenager who looked nervous. He's good, the man finally said. He's been practicing, Keanu replied. Wants to do it right. The old man smiled faintly. Good, that matters. Keanu glanced sideways. You served? The man nodded. Vietnam, 3rd Recon, long time ago. Thank you, Keanu said. The man chuckled. Most people don't say that anymore. They should. Keanu replied. You carried more than just weight. You carried us. The man studied him, as if trying to figure something out. You're the one they keep talking about, he said. The actor, the shooter. Keanu smiled. I'm just a man who wanted to be prepared. For the right reasons. You are, the old man said. I've seen a lot of shooters in my life. Most of them chase noise, but you move like silence. Those words hit deep. What's your name? Keanu asked. Clay, he said. Clay Murdoch. Keanu offered his hand. I'm Keanu. I know, Clay said with a grin. You've been teaching them more than drills. I can see it. They walk different now, more aware, more humble. Just then, a loud bang echoed from the range. Someone had misfired. Keanu stood immediately. Tommy ran to check. The girl at the booth, maybe 19, was shaken, but unharmed. Her hands trembled as she set the pistol down. Breathe, Keanu said gently, stepping beside her. You're okay. Just a flinch. Happens to everyone. She nodded, blinking fast. Do you want to stop? He asked. No, she said, her voice cracking. I want to get it right. Keanu gave her a soft smile. Then we'll take it slow. Together, they worked through the drill again, step by step, until her hands steadied. Clay watched from the bench, nodding to himself. After the lesson, as the room began to empty out, Clay spoke again. You ever think about teaching more formally? Keanu shook his head. I've never thought of myself as a teacher. That's exactly why you should, Clay said. Best teachers aren't the loud ones. They're the ones who remember what fear feels like. Keanu sat down again. I just want people to feel safe, prepared, respectful. Then, don't stop, Clay said. They need you. And not just in here. Keanu leaned back, thoughtful. Outside, the wind had picked up. Clouds moved across the sun. I saw a lot of men fall apart after war, Clay said softly. Not just from what they saw, but from what they lost inside. No one taught us how to come back, how to live without noise. He looked around the room. This place, it's more than a shop now. It's a space to remember who we are beneath the fear. Keanu nodded slowly. I understand. Before he left, Clay handed him a folded piece of paper. What's this? Keanu asked. My old unit's creed, Clay said. Used to carry it in my boot. Maybe it's time someone else carried it forward. Keanu unfolded the paper. Written in faded ink. Fight only when needed. Stand only when others fall. And never forget, silence is not weakness, it's control. Keanu folded it gently, placing it in his pocket. As he walked out into the breeze, the bell above the door chimed behind him. And inside that shop, every man and woman who had watched him knew something had shifted. This wasn't just about guns. It was about strength. Discipline. And something even harder to master, humility. The man with the scarred hand days passed, but the memory of that Saturday lingered in the air like gunpowder after a clean shot. Something had changed inside that little store. It wasn't loud. It wasn't written on signs or shouted in training videos. It was quiet, a kind of stillness that lived in the way people carried themselves, more aware, more respectful. And though he had no intention of becoming a teacher, Keanu returned nearly every other day, not to perform, but to be present, to sit in the background, to observe, and to step forward only when invited. On one such morning, as the dew still clung to the windows and the coffee hadn't yet cooled, a man walked in who didn't quite match the rhythm of the others. He wore a long coat. Even though the sun was warm, he had a wide stance, the kind a person has when they've been in too many fights. And on his right hand, a scar stretched from the thumb across the palm, like a lightning bolt carved into skin. His name was Jorge. He didn't introduce himself. He just walked in, looked around slowly, and said, I heard the actor trains here. Dan, behind the counter, straightened up. He comes by sometimes, yeah. Why? Jorge smirked. I want to see what all the fuss is about. Tommy walked out from the range. You looking to rent time? No, Jorge said. I'm looking for him. At that moment, Keanu stepped through the back entrance, quietly as always, a towel slung over his shoulder and a water bottle in his hand. He was dressed simply. As usual, faded jeans and a dark t-shirt. George's eyes lit up. You're him. Keanu nodded slightly. I am. You're the one they say shoots like a ghost. Keanu gave a soft smile. I just try to train with intention. I want to spar, Jorge said bluntly. The room paused. Keanu blinked. This isn't a dojo, no, Jorge said, lifting his chin. But I've seen men hide behind targets and drills. I want to know how you move under pressure. Keanu studied him quietly. Why? He asked. George's jaw tightened. Because no one's ever made me miss, and I want to know if you can. Dan spoke up, cautious. We don't do challenges here. Not like that. This place is about teaching, not proving. But Jorge didn't back down. Teaching or pretending. The air changed. It wasn't anger. It was something deeper and old wound. Keanu stepped forward, calm. You served Marine Recon. Jorge said, 2 tours. Came home, taught myself how to fight again. Keanu nodded, and now Jorge looked around. Now I test people. Make sure they're not soft. World's too dangerous for soft. Keanu's voice didn't rise. Soft isn't the same as silent. Jorge narrowed his eyes. Prove it. There was silence. Then, unexpectedly, Clay Murdoch's voice came from the corner. Boy, he said, you're looking at the wrong man if you want to pick a fight, and if you need pain to feel alive. You're not healing, you're hiding. Jorge turned slowly. And who are you? Clay stood, slower now, leaning on his cane. Someone who's bled enough to know that scars aren't strength. They're just reminders of where you broke. The room went quiet again, but Keanu didn't walk away. Instead, he said something that changed everything. I'll train with you, he said. Not fight. Train. On the range. With rules. With respect. If you're willing. Jorge paused. Something in Keanu's tone caught him off guard. Fine, he said. But I don't go easy. Keanu looked him in the eye. Neither do I. They stepped into the range. Set 2 lanes side by side. Tommy loaded fresh magazines. Dan set the timers. 3 stages. Keanu said, speed, accuracy, control. Best of 3 wins nothing except clarity. Jorge nodded. First stage, draw and fire 5 rounds in under 5 seconds. Target must hit inside the center ring. Beep. Jorge moved fast, aggressive, strong, loud. His shots rang like punches. He hit the target. For an 1 just outside. Keanu's turn. He moved like breath. Draw, fire, adjust, fire. No wasted steps. All 5 hit center. No cheers, no gloating. Just silence. Second stage. Mag reload under pressure. Beep. Jorge fumbled slightly. Sweat. 1 shell ejected to wide. Time, 3.4 seconds. Keanu, to 0.1 seconds. Flawless. Third stage. Blind start. They turned around. Back to the targets. At the sound, turn, aim, fire. Beep. Jorge moved like thunder. Keanu moved like wind. Final tally. Keanu 3, Jorge 0. But Jorge didn't look angry. He looked stunned. He stood still, gun lowered, breathing heavy. You didn't hesitate. He said softly, you didn't rush. And you didn't flinch. Keanu replied, because I don't shoot to win. I shoot to stay alive and keep others alive. Jorge looked down at his scarred hand. I've been chasing ghosts for years, trying to be harder than the last day I survived. Keanu nodded. I know that feeling. Then, quietly, Jorge stepped forward and held out his hand. Thank you, he said. Keanu shook it. Firm, respectful. You're welcome, he replied. As they walked back into the shop, Clay smiled from his chair. Sometimes the loudest men, he said, just need a place to feel quiet again. And that day, the gun store wasn't a place for ego. It was a place where broken things were allowed to mend. Because when respect leads the room, even those scarred by war learn how to rest their hands. The day the kids walked in a gray Thursday morning, the town woke up slower than usual. The sky hung heavy with low clouds, and the streets were damp with last night's rain. Inside the gun store, the usual crew gathered early, warming their hands with hot coffee and trading quiet stories. It had been weeks since Keanu first walked through that door. And yet every visit still felt like a moment worth remembering. He didn't come to impress. He came to listen, to serve, and in that silence, something extraordinary had started to grow. By now, word had spread far beyond town lines. But it wasn't gossip. It wasn't viral fame. It was something deeper, whispers of a place where people trained not for ego, but for discipline. Not to dominate, but to protect. A place where you were met not with judgment, but with open eyes and open hands. And that's why they came. 3 teenagers, 2 boys and a girl, no parents, no gear. Just hoodies, backpacks, and anxious faces. Dan looked up as they stepped inside. You kids lost? One of the boys shook his head. We heard. You do training here. We want to learn. Mick glanced at Tommy. You heard right, but this isn't Call of Duty. You don't come in and start firing rounds. The girl spoke next. Her voice was steady, but something about it carried pain. We don't want to shoot. We just want to feel safe. Her words. Stop the room. Keanu, who had been cleaning a pistol in the corner, stood up and walked over slowly. He looked at the girl. Her sleeves were pulled down over her wrists, but her eyes told the real story. He didn't ask questions, didn't assume. Instead, he asked gently, "What happened?" She hesitated, then finally whispered, "Someone followed me home last week. Twice. Cops couldn't do anything. I just want to feel like I'm not powerless." Keanu nodded slowly. "And you?" He asked the boys. The taller one answered, "She's our friend. We just want to make sure nothing happens again." Keanu turned to Dan. "We have room." Dan nodded. "Always." And just like that, the schedule shifted. Instead of the usual advanced drills that day, the shop transformed into something else, a sanctuary. Keanu led the class himself. He started with the basics: posture, awareness, how to walk with confidence, how to look without staring, how to keep space around you in crowded places. Your first tool, he said, isn't a weapon, it's your awareness. Most threats can be avoided before they begin if you're present. He taught them how to use their voice, not to shout, not to scream, but to speak with calm power, to say no like they meant it, to hold eye contact without shaking. He taught them how to breathe, how to stay still. How to move without panic. Then, quietly, he took them into the empty range, not to fire, but to feel the space, to hear how sound changes, to stand still in silence, so they could learn that control doesn't start in the hand, it starts in the heart. The girl, her name was Leah, watched everything closely. She didn't smile, not yet, but her hands stopped shaking by the end of the lesson. "You're strong," Keanu said softly. She looked at him, doubtful. "I don't feel strong." "Strength doesn't mean fearlessness," he replied. "It means standing anyway." As the kids left, Mick handed them a stack of printouts: self-defense tips, emergency contacts, and community programs. "Come back anytime," Tommy added. "This place is yours now, too." After they were gone, the shop was quiet. Clay, sitting in his usual spot, finally spoke. "Those kids didn't need weapons," he said. "They needed to be seen." Keanu nodded. "And they needed someone to tell them it's okay to fight fear with calm." That night, Leah's grandmother called the store. Dan answered. "I just wanted to say," she said, voice trembling, "my granddaughter hasn't slept through the night in weeks, but tonight, she's sleeping. Thank you." Dan didn't know what to say. He just stared at the wall where the shop's mission statement had been quietly updated earlier. That day, "This is not a place for war. It is a place for peace through readiness, humility, and care." Keanu had written those words in pencil. And the others decided to frame them, because something had become clear. This wasn't a store anymore. It was a refuge. For veterans. For survivors. For the young, the weary, the wounded. And behind it all was a quiet man in flannel, who never asked for attention, but gave everything. The quiet good weeks passed, then months. What began as a curious visit by a quiet man in flannel had grown into something no one expected. The little gun store on the edge of town, once just a place for ammo, rifles, and casual chatter, had become a center of respect, transformation, and healing. The regulars still came, but now they came early, stayed late, and helped newcomers with more than just gear. They listened, they watched, they remembered what it meant to stand beside someone instead of over them. Veterans who once walked in broken now led small groups in tactical breathing, range drills, and mindset sessions. Young people like Leah and her friends had returned. Often, they still didn't shoot. They didn't need to. They were learning something far more powerful: confidence. And at the center of it all was Keanu. He never demanded leadership, but somehow, everything flowed from his example. He showed up on time, cleaned up after others, and stayed long after the lessons ended, sometimes just sitting beside someone who had more silence in their eyes than words in their mouth. But one morning, everything felt different. The sky was clear. Birds chirped outside the open door, yet something about the air hinted at change. Keanu walked in like he always did, coffee in hand, towel draped over his shoulder. But his steps were slower, more thoughtful. Den noticed first. "Everything all right?" Keanu smiled softly. "Yeah, just it might be time." Mitt put down the gear he was sorting. "Time for what?" Keanu looked around. At the shop, at the range, at the people he'd come to call friends. "Time for me to step back." The words settled over the room like dust. "What do you mean?" Tommy asked, suddenly still. "I came here looking for quiet," Keanu said. "I stayed because I found purpose, but this place doesn't need me anymore. It has you." No one spoke for a moment. Clay, slow but steady, walked over and leaned on the counter. "You're not walking away because you're tired. You're walking away because you've built something strong enough to stand on its own." Keanu nodded. This store became more than a place to shoot. It became a place to heal, a place to listen. And it was never about me. The door opened. Leah stepped in with her grandmother, holding a folded piece of paper. "You can't leave without reading this," she said, voice trembling, but brave. Keanu took the paper, opened it. It was a hand-drawn card. On the front, a picture of a man holding a flashlight in a dark tunnel. Inside, it said, "Some people light the way without ever saying a word. You were that person for me." Keanu blinked fast, then placed a hand on her shoulder. "You lit your own way, Leah. I just reminded you the light was still there." He spent the rest of the day the same way he always did, humbly, calmly, teaching anyone who asked, checking targets, sweeping the floors, reloading mags for the veterans who shook too much to do it themselves. And just before sunset, he quietly packed his things. He left no speech, no announcement, just a folded note taped to the counter. Den read it out loud after he'd gone. "If you ever feel afraid, remember what control feels like. If you ever feel small, remember what respect sounds like. And if you ever feel lost, look back here, because you built this too. Be ready, be kind, and shoot straight, even in life." Keanu. Weeks later, his name still came up in conversations, but not as the actor, not as the shooter. As the man who walked in unnoticed and left unforgettable. One afternoon, a reporter came by, curious about the story. "Did Keanu really train here?" she asked, eyes full of doubt. Dan smiled. He pointed to the chalkboard still hanging near the range entrance. At the top, the words, "Humility is louder than noise," and under it, one name. Written not in chalk this time, but carved into wood. Keanu. The reporter tilted her head. "Why do you think he came here?" Tommy answered without looking up. "Because sometimes the world gets so loud, even the strongest men need somewhere quiet to remember who they are." And outside the shop, where the sky met the hills, a lone figure walked the dirt path, free, quiet, at peace, because his work wasn't done. It had just taken root.